I don't know if you heard it this morning, but our gospel story this morning is a little bit strange, right? It's an odd story. There's not really language to capture what is trying to be conveyed in the words this morning. We try, but quickly we reach the limits of language when we get to the Transfiguration. Now, I don't know if you were here last week, but last week we were on a different mountain with Jesus. We were on the mountain where Jesus gives this famous sermon called the Sermon on the Mount, conveniently enough. And in our scripture last week, Jesus tells us, "You are the light of the world." Now, this morning, we are 12 chapters after this moment on the Sermon on the Mount, and we're at a different mountain, Mount Tabor, and Jesus has brought some of his closest followers up the mountain, and this morning we see the source of this light, the source of the light that we are for the world. We see the origin point in Jesus himself. Now, last week, we heard Origen, this church father, tell us that Jesus is the kingdom of heaven in skin and bone. And this morning, we see that perfect consummation of heaven and earth, of divine and human. I love the way that a monk who lived 1,300 years ago in the city of Jerusalem, his name is John of Damascus, confusingly enough. He lived in Jerusalem, originated from Damascus, but St. John of Damascus puts the Transfiguration story this way. Christ is transfigured, not by putting on some quality he didn't have before, nor by changing into something new, but by revealing to his disciples what he truly is. He remains what he has always been, while also unveiling his splendor. He is indeed the true light, the radiance of glory. Now, if you're still just as confused as you were before John explained the Transfiguration to us, I want to assure you that you're on the right track this morning. It's okay to be confused when we get to stories like the Transfiguration, because quickly we realize that this is an opportunity for us. When we get to a story, when we approach a scene that is beyond our comprehension, we also realize that this is a scene, this is a moment that is beyond our control. That God is beyond our control. So when we get to passages of scripture that we might not understand, whether it's the Transfiguration story or it's something else in the Gospels or anywhere in our collection of stories, when we get to something we don't quite know what to do with, it's a reminder that if we can't understand something, instead we're invited to stand under it, to listen to it. The trouble is, we have a hard time listening in our modern day, don't we? There's a lot of noise in our world today. I don't know if you've paid attention, but you're constantly bombarded with a cacophony of sound. Whether it's sound from preachers, sound from other people in your life, sound from social media feeds or news channels or anything as you go down the street, you're going to be surrounded by noise, which makes it really hard to listen. I'm particularly interested in this new era that we live in, this digital age, which has made information more accessible than ever before. And so we feel like we have a chance to understand everything. It's as easy as getting on Google or ChatGPT or whatever your favorite engine is and finding out an answer to a question you might have had. We don't have to wonder anymore. Information is available as fast as we can type or speak it. And the digital era has also made us believe that we have an opportunity to speak to everything that comes into our brains, anything that comes across our screens. We have the right, the duty to react to it and let others know what our reaction is in that moment. And these two things combined, this accessibility of information and the universal responses we have to that information, means there's a whole lot of talking going on in the world and not a lot of hearing. There's a lot of noise, a lot put in, and not a lot taken away. I don't know if you noticed the voice from heaven in this story from the Transfiguration, which repeats a refrain that we had heard earlier in January. You remember the story of Jesus' baptism. He goes to John the Baptist, and John says, whoa, what's going on here? I'm the one who needs to submit to you. And Jesus says, let us do it this way. It's proper for us to fulfill all righteousness. And then John consents and they baptize Jesus and he comes out of the water. And what happens? A voice says, this is my son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased. We hear it again here on the Mount of Transfiguration, on Mount Tabor. The voice from heaven interrupts Peter as he's mid-sentence saying, this is what we ought to do. He's reacting to the information presented to him. And instead, the voice comes through the clouds saying, this is my son, the beloved, with him I am well pleased. And one more piece of information. Listen to him. Becca explained to us when we say the Shema every single Sunday morning that the key word there, Shema, means to hear. But it's more than just receiving noise into our brains. It's to actually take it in and interpret it. Listen and do something in response to the listening. Listening is a key part of discipleship. And here the voice from heaven makes clear to those disciples who are witnessing something beyond their wildest imaginations that they don't have to immediately comment on it. They don't have to immediately go and share it with other people. Instead, they're invited just to behold it, to pay attention, to let go of whatever it is they were doing before, and instead to focus on this very moment. This is my son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. Listening is a key concept in the life with Jesus. And yet, how often are we actually listening? I just got back from Miami, Florida earlier last week. I was there from Sunday to Wednesday. I was there with a group of pastors who I've been with for 5 years now, and we travel around and we learn from people who are doing some really interesting things. And one of the key questions for us on our trip, not just for our time in Miami, but a question we were supposed to take back with us to wherever we were coming from. The question was, what are you hearing? And I wonder how often I actually get to ask myself that question. What are you hearing? Because so busy, I'm so busy responding, doing something, that I don't actually ask myself to slow down, to take a beat, and to pay attention to my surroundings. But Miami, in a place that's filled with noise and color and excitement, we were asking ourselves this question regularly. What are you hearing? After every conversation, after every meeting, after every chance we had to eat with somebody, we would reflect on that question. What are you hearing? One of the places I was most moved was actually a suburb right outside of Miami called Florida City, which is like your last stop before you get to the Florida Keys. And in Florida City is an incredible community called Branches. I invite you to look it up right now on your phone. If you're tired of listening to me, go read instead and witness what Branches is doing. It's incredible work. Branches kind of came about in 1993 on the heels of Hurricane Andrew, which left South Florida devastated. There was one woman who came down from Virginia. She was part of a relief effort named Kim. Kim was sent to Miami to go work with children and youth after the hurricane had passed through. And it turns out Kim never left. She stayed there and she started bringing kids to this little United Methodist church in Florida City called Florida City UMC. And it turns out the church wasn't very receptive to these kids from the community. They didn't really want them there. But Kim claimed she was too naive, too dumb to realize that, and she kept bringing the kids Sunday after Sunday to every single event the church was engaged with. And this repetitive instinct actually led to some deep transformation within this faith community. Florida City United Methodist Church eventually became the same name as the nonprofit that was raised up by Kim Torres, Branches. Branches is a program for youth and children in the city and Florida City, where kids can come and have a safe place to learn and work on homework, where they can engage in conversation to work on social and emotional health, where they can be engaged in physical play with each other in a safe place with some games. Branches was incredible to me because what I learned as I talked to adult workers and volunteers who were at this nonprofit is that they were former children and youth in this program, who then came back and decided to serve at Branches through AmeriCorps. And every time I heard them say this, somebody cared for me and paid attention to me when I was a kid. And now as an adult, I want to be that person for another child. Somebody heard them. noticed them, witnessed what their worth and value was, and it changed them. And now Branches, instead of being a dying United Methodist congregation, has over 125 kids on their campus every single day. They've had thousands of kids go through this program, go on to college and graduate education. They're a nonprofit that has a budget of $6 million, and last year brought in $9 million. Because they pay attention and they listen to their community. This is my son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. How often are we listening? And I mean really listening. Taking the moment, taking the opportunity to pay attention to people right around us or in front of us. To listen to their hopes, their pain points, their dreams, their fears. And really internalizing it and then asking ourselves, where might be God speaking in the midst of this person and what they're sharing with me? You know, so often the church gets really busy doing things as a congregation, doing things to make sure we're worth coming to, making sure we keep the lights on and the bills paid, but we can easily become internally focused, ignoring the plea and the cries of our neighbors. Later on in the Gospel of Matthew, in chapter 25, Jesus is on yet another mountain. He's on the Mount of Olives, right outside the city of Jerusalem, just before he is handed over and tortured and executed, before his resurrection. And on this Mount of Olives, he begins to give a series of teachings to his followers. And one of them is a famous parable that I'm sure you've heard before if you've been around the church. It's the parable of the sheep and the goats, about how we distinguish who is really following Jesus the Christ. And what does Jesus say? The thing that differentiates those who truly follow and those who just seem to but don't actually follow, the thing that differentiates them is that those who served, who did to the least of the brothers and sisters in the community, did also to Jesus. Those who actually took the time and paid attention to those who are in pain, those who are left out, those who are plagued by illness or poverty, those who suffer under racism and discrimination, those are the people that are worth paying attention to. And Jesus says when we do that, we're actually attending to him. Jesus says we are one and the same. I am those people, which is fascinating. How do we listen to Jesus today? Yes, of course, when we gather on Sunday mornings and we hear stories like the Transfiguration told, we have an opportunity to encounter Christ in our midst. But the voice from heaven, which spoke to James, John, and Peter 2,000 years ago, speaks right here now to us today. This is my son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. Where do we hear Jesus speaking today? Could it be that Jesus calls to us from people who aren't necessarily inside these walls? People in our community, in our midst, who we might pass by every single day. But because we're so focused on our tasks, our to-do lists, because we're in a rush to get here to worship and make sure our kids are situated and we look presentable for our fellow neighbors, maybe we're just overwhelmed by the frenzy of noise and distortion in our lives that we don't actually pay attention to the people we walk by every single day. There is an opportunity for us to hear Jesus speaking. There's an invitation for us to listen to him. Transfiguration Sunday sits on the precipice between two seasons in the church. We're wrapping up the season after the Epiphany, which happens in the midst of all the wrapping paper and the tinsel and the lights, so I get if you don't remember it. It's a little overwhelming at times. But the Epiphany is this moment when Jesus' identity is revealed to the world, this baby born in Bethlehem. And do you remember what guides those people from a faraway country to come to him in Bethlehem? It's a star, right? The light shines in the darkness and leads the people to the baby. And here at the very end of this season, weeks after this story with the wise men, we see another light shining on high. Jesus, the Christ, erupting with luminous light, radiance of glory. And here we see the light shining. Well, believe it or not, This light doesn't just stay in the season after the Epiphany, but this light shines and guides our path into the next season that we're about to embark on, the season of Lent. On Wednesday, we're going to start 40-something days together as the people of God, where we journey with God through the events of Jesus' life that take him to Jerusalem, to the seats of religious and political power. And there we see Jesus come face to face with the darkness. And just as the Gospel of John tells us, the darkness does not overcome that light, even when the darkness tries to kill it. But what if Transfiguration Sunday set the tone for the season of Lent? What if instead of Ash Wednesday being the beginning of this season, Transfiguration Sunday actually was? How would that change the way we approached these 40-something days? Would we be so somber, so morose, so morbid as a people like we often do during this season? What if instead we approached the season of Lent with a keen ear, with less to distract us and take away our attention? What if, guided by the words from the voice from heaven, we actually paid attention and listened to Jesus for the next 6 weeks? How would your life look different? Now I get not everybody can tune out all the noise all the time. We're not all called to go be St. John of Damascus and move into a monastery in Jerusalem. But what if in the in-between times, instead of turning on the podcast or the audiobook, what if at the end of the day, instead of zoning out with your favorite episode of reality TV, what if you took a couple of minutes and asked yourself, what are you hearing? What if you asked yourself, what is Jesus saying to me today? What if our church as a community actually did this work? How would we look different after 6 weeks? Would we look a little more like churches like Branches United Methodist Church, where the walls that seem to separate us from our community grow porous and transparent so that we become indistinguishable from our neighbors? What if the church with a capital C allowed Transfiguration to shape the way we enter, not just into the season of Lent, but the rest of our lives? What if instead of speaking, we made space for our neighbors to speak? One of my favorite theological thinkers is a guy named Chris E.W. Green, and this is what he says in his sermon on the Transfiguration. He says, "We are most fully known not when we say everything we think, but when we listen most attentively, not when we bear our souls, but when we bear others' burdens." What if we took that to heart the next 6 weeks leading us to Easter? And what if on the faces of those in pain, those who are poor, those who are oppressed, the ones whom Jesus names in Matthew 25, what if on their faces we saw that radiant light shining? Could we too be transfigured?
Thank you for listening to this episode of Weekly Teaching. To watch the full live stream of this worship service, you can view all archived streams at the Alamo Heights UMC YouTube channel. If you have any questions, email us at podcasts@ahumc.org. That's podcasts@ahumc.org. You can also visit our website, ahumc.org, anytime. Any related links are also in this episode's show notes. Again, thank you so much for being a listener. We truly appreciate your time.